Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, is my good friend, Mr. Drew Crawley. Drew, good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend. How was your weekend?
It was very good. Actually, last night, Cindy and I drove to Lexington and saw our friends in Sweet Lady. And they
Excellent.
were, man, they were hot last night. I'm telling you that. Uh, uh, just fantastic. So you'll see us posting their show schedules on our social media, on our Facebook page and Instagram. If you see them in your area, be sure to go give them a listen because you'll really enjoy it. But that was a lot of fun. How about you? Anything out
Outstanding.
of the
Yeah,
ordinary?
no. A little bit of gigging Friday night and
Yep.
was up in Lexington last evening. Got to visit our mutual friend, Mr. Benjamin Eves, for just a little bit.
Benjamin Eves.
And then today I was jamming with some friends here in Louisville out in the Simpsonville area, just
Yep.
kind of a little bit east of Louisville, working on some new music. So it was a lovely
Awesome.
way to spend a Sunday afternoon. I think I sent you some videos earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
It's
that looked
fun.
great. I need
Yeah.
to be a fly on the wall there next time. But we've got a fun show for you. We've got David Levine with the Whiskey Ring podcast with us. David is a fantastic writer. He and I had a brief time there where we wrote together for the ABV Network's Whiskey Corner blog, and I found David just to be really talented, and everything that he writes is very well thought out. And we're going to talk about an article of his during the course of the show. And he's going to take us through a couple of tastings as he would do if he were writing a review. So we'll get with David in just a couple minutes. But first, we want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who produce content for the whiskey enthusiast. We have a show like Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. That show is fantastic. If you want to know more about how the whiskey in your bottle got there, you need to get into that show. If you're a distiller yourself, you need to listen to this show. And if you're a wannabe distiller, listen to this show because they interview distillers from across the nation and around the world about very specific distillation techniques and problems, and it's a lot of fun. Alan also has a what he calls one piece at a time distilling institute, and that is where he will take questions. You can email Alan any question that you have regarding distillation, and then he'll record video responses to that and post them on his website. We also have My Whiskey Den with Pat and Mike. My Whiskey Den airs every Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. My Whiskey Den is where craft whiskey is king. So jump in there, listen to their show, watch their show, join in the chat. The chat's always a lot of fun. And then you got Bourbon Turntable. You know us. You found us because you're listening to this show. So while you're here, hit that subscribe button, and that way you will always be with us. And we want to give you one more brief announcement.
All right. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification to find out when new episodes come out, which is every Wednesdays on all of your streaming services everywhere, Apple, Spotify, whatever other ones there are, and the YouTube where you can watch the live recording itself.
Thanks, Mike. Always a professional. We appreciate your contributions to the show. So without further ado, let's bring David in. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable, David.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is
Happy
going
to
to be
have you.
fun. This is going to be fun. So, I guess first question is, and we'll get into what you're doing presently in whiskey, but how did you get into whiskey to begin with?
So I got into it in a really old-fashioned way. I was never much of a drinker, maybe some wine, didn't like beer, cider even.
Mhm.
And I was in grad school, and I was told, like my second day maybe, that if you wanted to get through grad school, you need to be able to drink. And so a couple of friends of mine brought over, a couple of whiskeys, and then we went down to this bar in the city, in New York City, where I'm based, that anything on the shelves, from like the cheapest bourbon that's you got there to the 30-year-old Macallan or whatever, you can get an ounce of anything in a 3-ounce flight. So I was there. I think I tried like a Jefferson's, a Woodford, and I don't even remember what the third one was that day, but it just kind of kickstarted my whiskey journey. And I found, I really like this. It doesn't taste like ethanol, or acetone mostly. And after only about a month or so, I started writing down my notes because I was like, I want to remember more than anything. I just want to remember what I liked. You know, I want to be able to taste these things that, can I name drop the bar? Is that good?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the Whiskey Ward, 121 Essex Street. They're good friends of mine. It's fun. They have like 700 things behind the bar. So I wanted to remember what I was trying, whether I liked it and why I did or didn't. So I just started, and I found a whiskey journal online for like $8 or whatever, and just kept ordering them. Eventually designed my own because I wanted to have my own. And like over the course of a couple of years, I've now got about 1,700 notes written up, and only about a quarter to a third of those are posted at this point. I'm never going to post all of them. There's just no way. But yeah, I just started going with it. And the other part of it that made me get into whiskey, besides apparently needing to drink together at grad school, was that I started working for the business school where I was working. And it was the very end of Mad Men. It's like 2015, 16. And I was working for a business school trying to raise money. So I also had the idea that you needed to be able to drink with the guys that you were meeting with. And generally they were guys, and generally were whiskey drinkers, which made it kind of just an easy transition in there.
Right.
And it just took off from there.
So is your approach to whiskey more left brain or right brain? Because some people come at it from more of the creative, making the whiskey and that aspect of it, and some people kind of dig more into the analytics of it and that kind of thing. What kind of camp do you fall in, or do you kind of fall into both?
Definitely both, and really a full foot in each. When I'm trying things, certainly now, I think it took a little time to develop, but now when I'm tasting something, I'm trying to think of, number one, do I like it? How does it taste? What is it making me feel? Is it giving me any kind of synesthetic effect where I'm seeing like this reminds me of a color or a sound or a particular feeling? And the creativity that goes into it that can come from blending or finishing. And then I go into the more rational side of the intentionality and how someone got to it. So I really want to know what the distiller or the producer was thinking. To a large extent, well, we can only look at the label and say, well, that's what they were thinking because they put out that product with that name or that information on the label.
Yeah.
So, if I'm tasting a scotch and I see something, which I know is, it's anathema to the show, but if I taste a scotch and it's like a sherried and peated scotch, something like that, if I only taste the sherry and I can't taste any of the whiskey underneath, then I'm going to say, well, that rationally didn't succeed.
Right.
If I'm getting everything that the producer says that you're supposed to get without looking at the tasting notes, then all right, it was successful. And then beyond that, I can add on those extra kind of 2 points, if you will, at the top of, was it successful and mind-blowing or interesting in some way?
Right.
So I really go back and forth between the two sides, and I just enjoy it. It's a grounding experience for me.
Yeah. Is there a process you went through to develop your palate?
Not at all. And I wish I had a better answer on that one, but no, not at all.
No, that's a good answer. That's a very good answer. That's an encouraging answer for the amateurs out there, right?
I'll take that back. This was my process. I went to the Whiskey Ward religiously about once a week, and I never got the same thing twice. I would get 3 things if I was feeling adventurous, 6, and because I have a pretty high tolerance. Despite all these tastings, I have never been drunk. Don't even ask. So I would try 3 or 6 things, whatever, 1 or 2 flights, and just keep trying. And that's really all it is just keep trying stuff. Try everything. There's at this point, I know there are certain brands that I just don't enjoy, so I don't really go after them.
Right.
But I definitely tried them.
Yeah.
And if they come out with something new, I'll try that.
Right.
Because maybe it's different in some way. But yeah, just try. Find a place near you that has a good selection. If you don't live in a place that has that kind of selection, then find friends. Well, move. Yeah, definitely move. Definitely move. Control states for the loss. Definitely move. But find friends who are into this too, and share stuff, and find even things like like there are services now that you can get samples from, and they're really good for beginners, for lack of a better word. There we go. They're good to just try things that you wouldn't get to try, and then you go from there and you start building up your palate and what you like, what you're sensitive to. Especially like I hate woody bourbons.
Right.
Woody whiskeys, just nope, go away. Elijah Craig 18 is oak water to me. And I know people go crazy for it. I'm just like, no, this is oak tea. But and I don't mind the craft funkiness on a younger whiskey if it fits. And I like most peat, except for I found out Great Lakes peat. Not a huge fan of that. But thanks to the guys at Mammoth for letting me try that, at least, so I knew that I don't like it.
Right. David, one of the things I loved about what you said is, regardless of your level of availability or your level of expertise, you are open to trying whatever the new thing may be, and you're staying present or open to that experience, and you're documenting it. You said you didn't have a process for developing your palate, but that's the exact process that I think every new whiskey drinker needs to go through, is just try everything, document it, think it through, and figure out what you might want to like. And that's the perfect kind of pathway or manuscript for new folks to follow. So I love that you shared that.
And if anyone is intimidated, I'll tell you the next funkiest thing that I've got to try is I'm having the Eimverk distillery on the podcast in about a week or 2 out of Iceland.
Oh,
and
awesome.
They're the folks behind Floki Sheep Dung. So I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it. I've been told to try it last because it will just wreck your palate whether you like it or not. But I'm going to try it. So
awesome.
Well, that's something to look forward to.
I think so. I'm hoping so. I'll let you know.
But I'll try anything, whiskey wise, spirits wise. I've had Malort, okay, so I'll try anything.
I don't hate Malort as much as most people, but I love black licorice. So
okay,
I'm weird. I've been told I'm very bitter because of that. I don't know.
But one thing that I've noticed on your website, when I just kind of scan through the articles, you're not cranking out reviews on hey, here's Blanton's or or Elijah Craig 18. I think you've got a couple of reviews in there for Booker's, but for the most part, you're not in the big bourbon space, unless you count Bardstown Bourbon Company as big bourbon now, right?
Arguable, yeah.
I guess legacy bourbon, it might be the better term to use.
I'm not getting BTAC samples. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, but to me, that's a valuable thing that you offer, and we try to do that on this show as well. We're not going to sit around here and sip, Buffalo Trace and talk about it. Not that there's anything wrong with Buffalo Trace or Blanton's or Elijah Craig or any of those, but if you want to find an article or if you want to hear an opinion on those, there's a million of them out there.
Mm-hmm.
But finding for people to that can latch on to what you're doing and follow what you're doing in your reviews and your podcast, they can develop a trust of that. And then when you say, hey, this is an 8 on my scale, then they can feel comfortable then going out, laying down their money and buying that and trying that. And that's a valuable service.
And it's so important. And I talk about it every once in a while in a review, but again, if you're in a place where you've got both good shops and good bars and places you can try things, yeah, finding people whose palate you trust and align with is really important. Like, I have a couple of stores that I know if they pick something from a brand that I like, I'm gonna like that.
Right.
And even if they pick from a brand that I don't like, I might like that too. And that's just through tasting.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, let's dive into the first tasting. And what we're going to be trying here is this Hindostan Falls. It is from Spirits of French Lick. It's just been out, I don't know, maybe a month to 6 weeks. And it is 80% corn, 10% rye, 10% malt. And the most interesting thing about it is the corn was actually developed by Alan Bishop, who's the distiller at Spirits of French Lick. It was a corn that he developed when he was farming for a living, and it's called an Amanda Palmer corn. And so this is the first bourbon that they've released at Spirits of French Lick that included that corn in the mash bill. So it's 4.5 years old, 104.3 proof. So David, kind of talk us through your process.
All right. Well, so first thing I do always I look at the color. There's certain aspects of my tasting process that are pretty classic. Just looking at the color, the viscosity, look at the legs, the rims, all that. I'll be honest, I don't think any of those have very much to do with the whiskey itself or whether I like it, but I like having those notes.
Sure.
Especially in the lower proofs when you see things are much more viscous or, when you get really thin rims at a higher proof. This is a nice mid-ground, actually.
Yeah.
So the next thing I would do is take a deep breath that's how I cleanse my palate. If you can drink water beforehand, that's fine. I'm not a believer that like you can't eat anything with onions for a day before you taste something or, no, your palate, your smells in the area, you know what your house smells like. So you trust me, you can get past that. So after you take the deep breath, the usual taste technique, I do use a Glencairn almost always. Any kind of tulip shaped glass is fine. Bring it up to your mouth, nostrils at the top of the glass, and mouth open and nose open, and sniff through your nose. And basically that should, in theory, let all that alcohol vapor go into your mouth, so you won't really taste it that much, and the flavor volatiles go up into the nostrils. So that's going to give me my first indication of just what does this smell like? Number one, is something wrong? Number one, or is it fine? So that's the initial sniff, and usually the nose part of the tasting for me is 3 sentences long. It's usually this first one, and then I go from nostril to nostril. Because the way your nostrils work, they go back and forth. They're not working at the same time, which is why colds, especially when you have it on one side of your face, are so annoying. It's because your other nostril wants to take a break and the other one says, sorry, can't. So go back and forth. And if it's my first one of the night, it'll figure out which nostril's working at that particular time.
Do you have a favorite nostril?
I don't. First time I've been asked that one, but yeah. And then after going back in that, the third sense will usually be I'll go back for just a general sniff. Maybe if I'm not getting much, I'll stick my nose a little deeper into the glass and just see what I'm getting. So On this, it's pretty clearly a high corn distillate. Like it's not quite mellow corn level because it's got the what I think is new oak, but there's a lot of corn on this, corn oils, and particular note that can smell corny and can also go into a little bit of acetone that specifically comes from corn. I don't know why, just always from corn. But a nice richness and caramel brown sugar in the back too. Not getting much of the rye, maybe a little creaminess from the wheat. Not the wheat, sorry, the malt. And of course, this one, could be a little different because, I mean, none of us know what Amanda Palmer corn distillate smells like. So,
Right.
Just, I have an insertion video here of Alan being like, well, this is what Amanda Palmer should smell like. Yeah. All right. And then going for the taste. And so first sip is usually just normal sip, not big, not small, normal sip, so you can taste it. Let it sit on the mid-tongue, wash it around a little bit, just so it coats, so you get all sides of your mouth. And again, if it's your first one of the night, your tongue is never that used to ethanol. You know,
right.
I don't taste the alcohol in the 80 proof spirit anymore. And whatever that says about me, I don't know. But I don't really taste it. But I do note that my tongue will become a little desensitized, and that's what I want. I want to get the flavors and not the alcohol. So this immediately, that it does come off a little bit more bourbon-esque. There's no funk to it. Again, the brown sugar caramel, the top of a creme brulee. Definitely a lot of vanilla on here. So the first sip is really about getting the flavors. And if I need to, take a second sip, a small one, just to reinforce that if it's a little tight. The second one I go in is for the mouthfeel. And that's really, what is it making me feel? Where is it hitting on the palate? Is it peppery on the tip? Is it hitting the front, the back of the tongue? Is it settling somewhere? Is it lacquering? I really like that. Get more fresh corn. And you can feel like the rye, it's a little pepperiness on the tip, but it's really all on the sides of my tongue. Washes over the entire front to back of the tongue. Hits a little bit of ethanol in the throat, which you can hear my voice. It's not a bad flavor. It's just first drink of the night.
Sure.
And I'm also getting a little roundness on the top palate where that's where the malt is hitting up there. So for me, I mean, this has got pretty good body. It's on the medium, little thin side to medium, but pretty medium bodied. Mildly coating. I would describe it as oily, rather than creamy or viscous. So a little slippery with a nice finish. It's pretty true to form throughout. The vanilla, corn forward. I like this. I'm happy I have a bottle myself.
Absolutely.
Drew, what do you think? Any thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with David. Kind of that little bit of the rye spice at the tip of the tongue. Again, very viscous and balanced in the sense that every part of your palate is engaged. And I think that's kind of a signature mark of all of Alan's whiskeys. We've talked about that on the show before. I pick up a little bit of almost like a pear note or like a golden delicious apple kind of skin thing on the back end, which I really, really like and prefer, just to kind of go with some of the vanillas and brown sugars and things of that nature. But overall, I think this is a nice mild deviation from some of the other Alan Bishop products. Really, really enjoy this as is. I want to spend a little more time with it to dissect the flavors, but just on kind of the first couple sips, really enjoying it. What
I
about
can see
you?
those-
Yeah, I actually get a little bit of a plum wine note in it, a little bit on the nose and a little bit on the palate, and then some like hazelnut on the finish, which I think you get that in a lot of stuff that Allen distills. But no, I enjoy this quite a bit. I think it's one of the better products that he's put out, and I like pretty much everything that he's done there. So
I'm kind of the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I like this a lot.
Yeah.
And Drew, I see the apples and the pears, and if I'm gonna write notes on that, if I like you went in and you thought about it, I could see you thinking about it, and you were like, okay, the pears, skin, and then the apple, like a golden apple. And so I'll start off with kind of the orchard fruits.
mhm.
And if I really can't, if I know that's what it is, but I just can't figure out which one. And then if I can, I'll just dig a little deeper. Like sometimes it's really clear golden apple, or I just tried a couple of things from Talnua Distillery in Colorado, and they have a lot of green apple, like fresh green apple on there. Kind of like Granny Smith minus the sourness of it. It's really bright. And so yeah, sometimes you can get specific. Sometimes I'm just like, it's just a bowl of mixed orchard fruits.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. All right. So we've got another one that we're going to get into here in just a minute. But in addition to your writing on your website, your reviews that you write there, and the podcast that you have, you also do some long form writing, if you will. And you had an article that was in Malt Review that was about In Search of Transparency. So give us the high level overview of that article, and then we'll kind of dig into some of the details of that and its implications elsewhere.
Sure. So just a brief bit of background. It was about Uncle Nearest and particularly their ryes. I was really focused on the rye. And I came at it because simply, it was a really simple beginning of just, they sent me the uncut, unfiltered rye, which was the first bottle of their first variation on the rye that came out. Tasted it. And I said, this doesn't taste like a rye. This doesn't taste right. It doesn't taste bad as though something was off with the batch or mustiness or anything. It tasted like a whiskey. I was like, this doesn't taste right. It tastes like a malt of some kind. And at the time, I didn't really think much of it. Like I did look at the back label and it said that Tennessee doesn't grow rye well, and that they found it in New York. And I was like, all right, that doesn't really make sense. And it also said product of Canada on the bottom. But nothing much came of it. And I subsequently got 2 more bottles, the 100 proof version, and then a single barrel, all of the ryes, same rye batch, if you want to call it that, and just in different forms. So the thing about the article was really that, number one, I was just tipped off by, it doesn't taste like a rye. What's wrong with this? So for me, something was wrong in the product. But as I got subsequent labels, it just didn't make sense.
Right.
So I skipped a part of that, which was really important. So after the first label, which I in the article, I made sure to include a picture of it just so no one was like, you're making this up. It said, again, product of Canada, Tennessee doesn't grow rye, and we found it in New York, baby. Was how the first paragraph ended.
Aged in the big city, right?
Aged in the big city, too.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, look, I've lived in New York all my life. And I know most of the distilleries here at this point that are in the city limits or thereabouts. And I'm like, there's not a single one that has any warehouse space available, let alone the volumes that supposedly Uncle Nearest is putting out for this. So, no, you didn't know. And then Colin, I remember Colin at Kings County, because I asked him, I was like, do you have any idea what they're talking about? And he said, well, some people do consider the big city to be Buffalo or Rochester, and I was like, yeah, but no, they don't.
No,
No,
nobody
no one
does.
does. Nobody does. So, and no offense to those, it's not about the cities. It's if you say the big city in New York, it's New York City. We've got more than half the population of the state in the city. Come on. So, I reached out directly to Fawn Weaver
Mm-hmm.
because I was fortunate to have first her and Clay Risen on a live episode of the podcast talk about kind of a retrospective 5-6 years later of how the story came about and how the whiskey came about and where the story was going. And then a couple of weeks later, I had Victoria Edie Butler on to talk more in detail about the whiskey and they hadn't built the still yet, but they were about to. They were building around it, what the master blend was going to be like. So, this was a brand that I held in esteem. I still do to an extent. And I reached out very innocently and I just said, hey, I'm looking at this label and these things don't make sense. It's also labeled as straight, which we'll address in a minute. And I'm like, if it's a product of Canada that was aged in New York and then finished in Tennessee, how is that straight? Like, there's no way that could be straight, according to what I thought were the rules. And a couple of, I think there was one genial exchange and then a couple of terse ones. And long story short, I got introduced to their lawyer, and not and he was the one who first informed me of this change to the laws in CTB about straight designation. The rest of it was not addressed at all. Only the straight designation part. So then jumping back into the timeline, I get the second bottle, the 100 proof. The label is changed. It has no mention of New York. It looks more like a shelf talker of just, this is whiskey from, still doesn't say like specifically from Canada other than the produced in Canada, product of Canada rather, on the bottom. But it's just like, this has notes of blah, blah, blah. And, you really enjoy it. My great-great-grandfather would enjoy it. So no mention of anything like that. And then the final one, the single barrel, did bring back a bit of a story on the label to say we found it in New York after a brief stint in British Columbia where it was distilled or where it began its life. I forget the wording off the top of my head, but something like that. It was the first mention of it being Canadian in the main part of the label. And through all of this, I kept in touch with them. I kept in touch with the PR agency that they were working on because, again, it was a brand that I cared about, that I esteemed. I didn't necessarily like every whiskey they were putting out, but I thought that their story was great. I'd been on site. I visited last August, and it was great. And I was like, this is something that could be so cool, but why are you hiding this? Something's not right here. And especially after I started receiving no response and then, it was kind of pushed back to the lawyer again, I was like, okay, something's not right. And that's just where the article took off. I started doing digging, started doing, giving it around to friends to be like, am I just crazy? Am I tasting this wrong? Because you'll come across a whiskey or two in your career where you just don't like it or it doesn't match for some reason with your palate and everyone else tastes something that you don't.
Yeah.
And I just started looking into it from there.
Yeah.
So that was a very in-depth overview, but
no. And we'll post a link to that article in the show notes. So if you haven't read it and you're listening to this, I would encourage you to read it. Again, there's the Uncle Nearest aspect of this story, but then there's also the recurring problem of labeling issues and transparency issues in whiskey. Now, I won't go into a lot of detail and take up a lot of our time on the show with this, but I've had my own issues with transparency from Uncle Nearest. And I've not dealt with people at the level that you are, but I've just ran into, I guess, their ambassadors at tasting events. And several years ago, I guess shortly after they started producing the product, maybe even within a year, I was doing a tasting and with an ambassador there, and started asking questions, and they're telling me that this is their own distillate, and they're great distillers, and I'm like, that's not true. I don't know if they're just not telling you anything, or if they're telling you the wrong things, or if you're just riffing here, but that's just not true. And I didn't really care for the whiskey anyway. I agree that the story is an incredible story, um, but at some point that incredible story's got to be backed up by the product that's in the bottle. And so I kind of had a bad taste in my mouth, literally and figuratively, uh, about the brand. And last fall, we were at the Bourbon on the Banks festival in Frankfurt, and Drew may have been with me at the moment, and I said, "Okay, I am giving this a fresh start." Okay, because we were walking by, their tent was there. I walked in and I looked at the guy that was there, and I said, "It's been a while since I've had your whiskey." And they had two of them out there, and I don't remember which ones they were. And I said, "What would be the best thing for me to try?" And he poured something for me. And my first question was, when will you start putting your own distillate in the bottles? Oh, that's our own distillate. We that's from our distillery. And it was just kind of like my heart sunk, because okay, I want this to work out. Okay, I want to believe in what's going on here, and I'm just like, no, you're not. This is not distilled on site there. And then uh, later on, I saw him again, and he was with another ambassador there who I think was a little senior to him. And uh, and I kind of asked the same question. Look, why are you so afraid of being transparent about the fact that this is sourced? And initially the second guy was, oh well, we're distilling it ourselves, and then we kind of went down that trail, and he ultimately relented. No, we're not distilling it here. We're distilling it someplace else. We can't tell you where. And then, went into all these reasons why they can't distill on site yet. And he said, have you ever tried to deal with OSHA? Like, I said, buddy, there are distilleries up and down this event that are younger than yours, and they're distilling on site. Well, we've got this huge campus. I said, okay, that's a choice. You, as a brand, you decided that you're going to focus and put resources in developing your tourism and your campus, as opposed to your still and your distillation. That's a choice, but just be upfront about it. And everybody's cool with it. But if you sit here and you try to tell me things that I know are not true, I really don't have a lot of patience for that. And it really puts a black eye on the brand, a brand that ought to have a great story to tell, and it ought to have the whiskey to back it up.
And frankly, that's why I finished the article in the way that I did, which was to say, like, I want to reflect on, where does this rye sit? Where does this whiskey sit in what the story is? The story itself at the base level is still great. It's backed up by, as many historical sources as we can find. I'm sure we're going to find some more stuff that probably won't be as favorable, because that's just how things happen. Law of averages.
Sure.
But the overall, and Fawn even said this when she was on the podcast. She was like, we got lucky that we had a story about a bourbon or a whiskey that involved an enslaved and then formerly enslaved person, that the distiller, that he was treated like a human being and his family was treated like a human being, and that there was a positive relationship there. Because there are any number of distilleries existing and no longer extant that can't say that.
Right.
And at the time I was thinking, that's beautiful. And And while I'm writing the article, I'm thinking that's a golden opportunity to say this is a positive thing. You have Jack Daniels, part of the biggest American distillery. I was about to say biggest American distillery in the country, so a little redundant, but the largest American distillery in terms of volume, who's added all of this into their visitor center, into their storytelling, because of course it looks good for them too. It's positive, it's a win-win situation. They both get something good out of it. So I said, look, the whiskey aside, the Tennessee whiskey aside, which yes, is still sourced, let's talk about the rye. Why in God's name did you need to put a rye out?
Right.
And this is where the intentionality comes in. Like, if you want to create a rye, I've got no problem with you creating a rye. But you did. You found it somewhere, tried to hide where it was from, masked what was going on with a flood of TTB label changes that didn't change anything. They just flooded the site.
Right.
They had 6 or 7 changes in October alone, and nothing changed on the labels. I looked over them a lot to make sure I could write that, because I don't want to get sued. So like, nothing changed. It was just flooding the site to see which agent they would get, and would they approve this, or one agent wouldn't approve it, and you take a gamble.
Right.
I figured if Nearest Green is working for Jack Daniel and then for his son, and his descendants are working for Jack Daniel's descendants, they didn't produce a rye until 2012.
Right.
There's no evidence that Jack Daniel or Nearest Green or anybody involved would have been distilling a rye or anything recognizable as a rye at that time. So there's no part of it that relates to the story.
Right.
The fact that Tennessee doesn't grow rye is not true. The first evidence that we have actually of distilling in what is now Tennessee was I think it was I'm forgetting exactly who it was. I'll follow up and put that in, but he was someone from Maryland, rye growing bonanza, moved west, took the rye with him, and grew it in what's now Tennessee. So that story doesn't check out. It's not good quality rye, frankly, and that's my own opinion. I know it's won all sorts of awards, but if you apply to enough award shows, you will get enough awards. And that's how that system works.
Yes, it is.
And that's a whole other podcast. So I was just like, basically, why did you do this? What was the purpose of this? And then you're going to stonewall me and the TTB and all these things and try to be like, well, it's straight now because of the law change. But I was like, that's not the point. The point is that we're whiskey nerds. We're people who are going to look at those labels and dig deep and question, why does it say it's made in Canada or whatever? There are people who are just going to look at it and say, oh, Uncle Nearest has a great story. I'm going to buy that bottle. And they're going to taste it. And they're going to say whether it's good or bad. And they're going to evaluate it based on the story that they know. And this is where you get into the dichotomy between kind of a general consumer and the person who's really going to look at those labels.
Right.
And there's not a lot of middle ground. And I said, even if 1% of whiskey drinkers look at this stuff, that's still a lot of whiskey drinkers right now. And I still, to this day, I just don't understand what the point was.
Right. Right.
So that's where it was really most upset, frankly.
Yeah. So in labeling in general, what would be some things if you are now in charge of TTB? What would be the first 2 or 3 things that you would do to clean up these labeling issues?
Number one, more staff. Number one, more staff. This one just came to me. I would also institute a block on how many times you can apply for a label change for one product in a particular period. Like, you can't flood. You can do one a month or whatever it is.
Right.
Certain changes you can do without TTB approval. You want to change the color from dark blue to light blue? Go ahead. Who cares?
Right.
Just don't make it green, because then everyone will think it's a rye. But in terms of stuff that's really important, I think reinstating what straight meant before May of 2020 is really important. So you know that it's from one place or, unchanged when it was moved from one place to another. Being very clear about requiring state of distillation, because right now it's optional. So require state of distillation, require state of production. Just two things. And most of the industry, I think, is genuinely doing that, and I really do believe that. I believe that the to use a phrase I don't particularly like, but let's use it, the bad actors who are intentionally trying to deceive aren't as widespread as some people think. They're out there for sure, but I think there is a difference between intentional misleading and a brand new brand who doesn't know some of these rules and doesn't know how the TTB works.
Right.
So also word order is big with me, because for example, the first label says Uncle Nearest Rye, and then in a cartouche underneath that, in boxed off, it says uncut/unfiltered straight whiskey. So most people will think, okay, it's a rye, it's a straight whiskey. But to me, I'm thinking, is it though? Is it a rye? And is it a straight whiskey? Why is it separated? Those terms all mean something, and they mean something in a particular order. And when you mix that up and separate them, it separates the meaning, and then you have to guess which ones. And that's what I think is intentionally misleading.
Yeah.
And then the final thing on that is simply, I am a big fan of disclosing mash bills. But I'll give you a compromise, and I will say you have to disclose a mash bill, or at least a percentage of the grain with which you are identifying the whiskey. So if you're calling this a rye, then you need to disclose at least 51% rye. We cannot assume that because you call it a rye and because the TTB let it through, because they'll miss some things, that it is 51% rye.
Right.
And if you want to make it an American whiskey, a blended, a light, whatever, that's fine. I have no problem with that. Make it whatever you want. If you can sell it, good, fine. But don't mislead. Don't fall behind flooding to figure out if you're going to get a different agent who understands the rules differently.
Right.
Yeah. And that grain thing is kind of where I'm taking the article next.
Sure. Yeah. And David, I'm 100% on board with you in the majority of those things. I would just kind of add, and maybe this is just Drew speaking for Drew, not on behalf of the podcast or of you, but as far as disclosure of mash bills go, that is honestly one of the least proprietary things that any brand has. I mean, how many brands are carbon copies of each other's mash bills, whether it's a bourbon, whether it's a rye, whether it's an American whiskey, whatever.
Right.
I'm all for disclosing mash bills. That should be like the easy card that you play to say that we're transparent. There's almost no reason I can think of to not disclose your mash bill when the yeast strain or the cooperage or the type of still or the cuts that you're making or the anything else that's involved in the process is actually what puts your signature and makes your product distinct. In the final product. I'm right there with you. I'm agreeing with you. I just would even challenge producers to go one step further. There's no reason why not to, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. You're right. How many people are using the Heaven Hill mash bill or the old Michter's mash bill of 60, 30, 10? And the other part of that too, and this is the laws catching up with the times, is that you can do a search for most of these mash bills now.
Right.
It's not a secret. We know what Heaven Hill's mash bills are. They now release those mash bills. They didn't always. Jim Beam still doesn't, but we know what the mash bill is.
Right.
All these things, we know what they are. So why are you trying to hide it? This isn't the Pepsi or the KFC recipe we're talking about here. As Drew, I completely agree with you. You can do the exact same process down to the size and shape of the still and next to each other, and they're going to be different.
Right.
Because it's you doing it.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And putting In addition, I would say you go a step further than just state of distillation, and I would say put the DSP number on there.
I'd be a fan of that.
Yeah.
You know, just to be as clear as possible, because distilled in Tennessee can mean a few different things. Mostly we know what that means. Mostly we know that means it was from George Dickel, but there are other places that are contract distilling as well. So,
and Dickel's doing less of that, a lot less of that now. They're almost eliminating it. Now it's mostly a Tennessee Distillers Group, TDG,
Yep.
TDC, something like that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The one problem with the DSP, and I do agree with you in principle on that. The one problem with it is that if you're doing a contract where you're signing an NDA about it, the government, any government, cannot impede on a contract.
sure.
Which, so that's where it gets a little thorny. You can implement the law that says that going forward, this has to be part of it. And then, any future contracts can have that. But for anything existing, then you'd have some gray area, which you always have. It's whiskey.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, all right. So speaking of whiskey, let's get into our second tasting, which is this rye
Whiskey
from
Thief, yes.
Whiskey Thief, formerly known as Three Boys Distillery. Whiskey Thief. Hunter Coffee is the master distiller there. This particular rye is 65% rye, 30% malted rye, 5% malted barley.
So in a way, it's kind of their take on a 95.5, but doing it their way.
Okay.
That's one. It's one way to look at it. I'm just saying.
By the math.
Yeah. I should say I'm in favor of that. That wasn't a criticism.
Yeah.
If Whiskey Thief guys, if you're listening, Hunter.
It's interesting to me, and not to jump the gun in terms of throwing out notes or anything, but you think about the stuff that comes out of Limestone Branch or even some of the MGP malted rye kind of products. This does not have the peach note, and it doesn't have the oak tannic structure that those have, whereas instead it's just a little bit softer, a little bit more towards what I kind of consider confectionery notes than stone fruit. As far as where the sweetness comes from, you get a little bit of more of a, I would say, powdered sugar, or even kind of mapley note, rather than the peach or the cherry or something of that nature. And I say it doesn't have tannic structure. I don't mean that it's not balanced and complex. I just mean that the oak is not the first thing that's perceptible on the palate. So I actually really enjoy this, and I would say this is one of my favorite things that I've had from Whiskey Thief / Three Boys, whatever we're calling it now. I know we're calling it Whiskey Thief, but it's always Three Boys to me.
Yeah, the Triberg Bridge was renamed the RFK Bridge in like 2006. Nobody calls it that. We've all got our names. No, I agree. I am getting some peach on here, but hearing the way you describe it, it does seem more like those candied peach rings.
Yeah, like the little gas
station
there. Candies.
Exactly. Yeah, like maybe it's got some juice in there. It's also got artificial flavoring in there too. But so it's like peach, just a little bit to the side. But no, I do quite like this. I'm getting a lot of the kind of hardcore dilly notes that you get in a really high rye. But you're right that it's a little bit softer. It's actually, now that I think about it, there's almost no black pepper. I'm getting almost no black pepper, which is usually a hallmark for those 95s. It's like the malted rye just made it much more creamy, coated the front tongue so we didn't get that assault on the front. No, it's quite good. And this is, for me, this is the first taste that I'm having of Whiskey Thief and Three Boys. So I'm coming at it completely blank slate.
Yep.
But based on this, I would definitely reach out to them and try some more stuff.
What do you think, Kevin?
I really enjoyed it. I liked to me, there's a little bit of a black tea on the nose, and a little bit of lemon, like a lemon zest or something. but I love the way it just coats the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily real thick, but it really envelops the palate. It's kind of buttery in texture, I guess.
Yeah.
And how do you think it drinks? And this go for both of you. How do you think it drinks as to the proof?
I don't think it's 114. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, so compare this just in our brains. Both of you probably have this, the old Granddad 114 or the old Overholt 114,
Right.
where the proof is kind of the initial, I kind of call it like a jab, not a punch, but it's a
Right.
jab. You kind of know it's there.
Right.
This one, absolutely not there. It's very approachable in terms of the proof point, almost dangerously approachable, one could say.
Yes. Yeah. The David, if you when you come back to Kentucky, we'll have to take you to Whiskey Thief, because this tasting setup that they have is they have 5 barrels out that you can sample from, and they have employees that thieve the barrel right there, and they're putting in your sample glass any of the barrels that you want to try, kind of, well, within limits, as much as you want to try them. And then if you find one that you like, you can thieve it yourself and put it in a bottle. So it's as uncut and unfiltered as experience as you're going to get.
I love it. I would love that. I'll take you up on that. And just a very quick story that made me think of was, you get a similar experience starting this past August. I went on the first one at MB Roland out in Pembroke.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on the first one with Paul, like the head distiller. He walked us through the rick house. I have never been so humid and disgustingly sweaty in my life. Like the top of a barn with barrels all around, and at the end of August in Kentucky, I'm gonna pass. But the rest of it was great. And he had I think 3 barrels there. It was the first time they did this, so they had the bottles ready. They had these 750 milliliter thieves that they had ready, and he said you can get a bottle of one, you can get a bottle of all 3, you can get 3 bottles of one, whatever you want. It's the first one. We're doing whatever you want. Basically, as long as it's under the legal limit, whatever it is, you're fine. So I ended up getting a bottle of the first barrel. I actually like the second barrel better, but there was so much charcoal in the glass and barrel char in there that I was just like, I'm just going to get a bottle, and it's going to have so much char in there, and it's going to just sit there. Unless as soon as I get home, I drain the bottle, filter it out, and all that. And I'm like, I'm not going through that. It's too much work. I got to leave from here to the airport. Like, I can't deal with that. So, but no, those experiences are just the best. And MB Roland's another one. I love their stuff too. So
yeah. Any other thoughts on this rye from Whiskey Thief, Drew or David?
I mean, I agree. It's dangerous drinkable. I think it's definitely drinks below proof. Yeah. I was at the old Granddad and the Overholt are good examples. I was also thinking of Michter's, which like, I mean, 114 is about where they're going to max out. 114 and change, but yeah, it's just very drinkable.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will be wrapping up side A of the show here, and we're going to talk some music with David in just a minute. But before we do that, let's talk with Drew about his music. Drew, what's going on?
Man, all kinds of cool stuff. So this past week, as we were recording this, we just launched a new website where you can find everything revolving around my music world. So it's drewcrawleymusic.com. We got the YouTube, social media, Spotify, Apple Music, future shows, upcoming releases, kind of a central hub for everything. So very, very excited about that kind of launching. And then as we are releasing this episode, I believe we will have a new single out from the upcoming album. So it'll be the 3rd and final single from this next record, title to be announced. And then as we are recording this, not as it's released, but as we're recording, we're a week out from going up to Nashville with our good friend Lorenzo Venturella and his new studio, Alpine
Yep.
Studios, to cut the next single. I think you are going to be joining me up there at least a little bit. We're going to go see a show, maybe play around in the studio a little bit. So lots of very, very exciting stuff, around music and everything like that, new releases. And then just if you wouldn't mind, I'm sure I'll plug this at the end, but check out that website, follow along, give me your email. I'll shoot you out all the information about upcoming shows, releases, and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Good stuff going on for you, Drew. Very happy for you, and look forward to hanging out and trying not to be in the way when you and Lorenzo are working next Friday. So it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot of fun. So, David, this is where the turntable side of the show kicks in. So we're going to talk a little music with you. And one of the things we found is that most everybody that's involved in whiskey in some level, shape, form, or fashion, whether a distiller or just a fan or a writer, a media person such as yourself, there's a music love that kind of comes along with that. So we'll start out with you like we start out with all of our guests like that. What was your first album? Do you remember?
No, and I really tried. What I can tell you for sure is that my first album was definitely something classical. Most likely, if I had to guess, Beethoven.
Okay.
So probably the piano sonatas or the piano concertos. And that's just me knowing my dad really well. So,
awesome.
Do you remember the first album that you bought for yourself?
Yes. And I'm going to totally embarrass myself. That was
most people
Avril
do.
Lavigne album. Yeah, it was an Avril Lavigne album. Around whatever 2000, whichever one she came out with then. But it was her big one. That was like Skater Boy and all of that.
Yeah.
So, and for a long time, still actually, people who just hear my name, they think I'm like, are you related to her? I'm like, no, she's Canadian. We don't even spell it the same way. She liked Nickelback for a few years, clearly. So I mean, no. But yeah, that was the first one I bought for myself.
Yeah, David, thank you for that, because I think we might have a rival for most embarrassing first album with me now, which was Blink 182, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket.
See, no, mine's way more embarrassing than that. That's a good album. That one's good. Was that? What's the one on that? Was that where they had "I'm Just a Kid" or "Small Things"? Which one?
It was that? "First Date" and "Small Things" were the singles on that one. Yeah.
Okay, that was one of my wife's solos when we met in an acapella group. "Small Things."
Oh,
so
nice. Acapella group. We got to dive in on that. I'm gonna let Kevin finish the questions, but we need to get down that road.
We're peeling back. We're peeling back the onion here, so this is good. Do you remember your first concert?
Yes. First concert was seeing Billy Joel at Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
2006. It was his 12 Gardens live tour. So it was before, like, now he's got a residency there,
right, where
he plays once a month. This was 12 shows at the Garden. We saw the 11th one, the one that was recorded. And it was incredible. One of his, I think the most fun, honestly, was that in the intermission, so he could take a little break, one of his crew guys came on, and Billy Joel was like, yeah, this guy can really sing. We want to sing a song for you. And he just belts out Highway to Hell. Better than the original. And everyone is silent looking at him, and he's clearly uncomfortable because he's like, do they like it? Do they not like it? What's going on here? And the song finishes and just bursts of applause. Probably the second loudest, just to the encore for Billy Joel himself. It was so cool.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So acapella group. So this was this in college?
Yep.
Okay. And what part did you sing?
Mostly tenor.
Okay.
Yeah, my voice has dropped a little bit since then, so now I'm more of like a baritone bass one. But yeah, the tenor, bass one, and I think I did alto once, but that was real tough times. Yeah.
Okay, so what kind of music did you do in the a cappella group?
So our group was all alt rock.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
it was all rock. It was when I joined, at least they had a mix of like Coldplay, Blink 182, Smash Mouth, like 90s, early 2000s
Mhm.
alt rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stacy's mom was on there. Yeah, and that is the group's signature song to this day.
Oh wow.
It's and it's fantastic. And the funny thing was that like I grew up on classical music and maybe Broadway too, but like classical and
Mhm.
Broadway, I didn't really listen to all rock or anything like that. Maybe some older groups, and I joined this group because someone who was about to become my ex said, "Oh, I think you would really enjoy this. Like, I've heard you sing. You can carry a tune. You've got perfect pitch. Like, join." And one of the rituals was that after you got to join, you could look at their entire catalog of what the group could sing,
Mhm.
and you could choose any song that you wanted off the list, and they would sing it. My problem was that I had joined a group where they had 30 songs on the list, and I knew 2 of them. I knew Stacy's mom because it was kind of hard not to, and I knew Accidentally in Love because of Shrek. So like yeah, it was rough for a little while.
Oh man. So as a follow-up, is there documentation of this on YouTube? Can we find this anywhere?
Yes, there are videos on there of me singing. There's group ones and there's a couple of solos. I've got Accidentally in Love. What was that song? Satellite by Guster.
Oh yeah.
Which I don't remember a word of to the right now, but I yeah, that was another solo of mine. And then I think once or twice I would jump in on either Stacey's mom or Viva La Vida. And yeah, see what's in
That's a
it.
great time. Great time.
Oh,
Yeah.
We have links for the show notes now, Kevin.
yes, I've just got
Yes.
to find them now. So
The group's admins are gonna email me like, why are we getting so many hits suddenly? Like, what's going on?
okay, what was the name of the a cappella group?
The Troublemakers.
Every a cappella group is like some bad music pun, right?
Yes, it is. And this was
100%.
before Pitch Perfect came out. So we were the Troublemakers before the Troublemakers.
That's awesome. I love it.
Outstanding.
I went to University of Binghamton and we had 9 a cappella groups while I was there. It was a huge community. We had the Bingham Tonics. We just called the Tonics. We had the Crosbys. That were their oldest group because the Bing Crosbys. Exactly. Exactly. And for a while they threw the best parties. And no belts included. But yeah, it was a huge community. We'd have this massive show once a semester. The day after we'd have auditions and everyone would come in, and it was a lot of fun.
Oh,
we had one that was, and it was so segmented too. Like we were alt rock. The Crosbys kind of did whatever they wanted because they were huge. They had an all male, they had an all female. We had one that was Jewish a cappella. We had one that was all Christian. That I still can't pronounce their name to this day.
What was the enrollment at University of Binghamton?
It was like 15,000, something like that.
Okay, all right,
regular university size.
Good.
Yeah, we just happened to. I don't know where the tradition came from. Like it wasn't there when my dad went there, but yeah, we had a lot of groups. There was a Broadway group that started while I was there. Yeah.
Oh wow!
I got you, Kevin. I got you on that one, didn't I?
that was good.
That is fantastic. Literal tears. This is so good. And so the fascinating thing is you're coming into it from a background of not knowing the music of the group that you're now a part of. So what did you sing in the audition?
In the audition, I sang a song from the musical Next to Normal.
Okay.
But I sang an alternative version, ironically. It was Next to Normal was written by Tom Kitt and his band. and I sang I've Been, and it's a great solo by the father in the show, the husband, I should say, really. And his lyrics were fine, but I actually like the original lyrics written by the band better. And they were just a little bit different. And there were a couple of people who were in the group at the time who saw me audition, who knew the show, knew the song. The show had just come out in 2008 or something. It was very new, and it was still on, I think. And they knew it really well. And so I'm singing it, and I can see them looking, and I know they're thinking, these aren't the right lyrics. What's going on here? So that's the first question they asked me afterwards, is like, no, it is the right lyrics. It's just not the Broadway version. It's the band version instead.
Right. So you had street cred immediately with a
Yes.
with a group
Yes.
that was into alternative music. So so you were immediately held in high regard.
Yeah, during Hell Week, we would routinely lose like a quarter to a third of our cast to concurring Hell Weeks for the theater groups on campus. So they'd be splitting Hell Weeks between the two of us, and it was madness. It wasn't even Sparta, it was just madness.
So now you grew up with a classical music background, and then translated that into your a cappella group time in college. Do you still sing?
Yes, not in a group anymore, but just for fun with my wife, with if we go out with friends to karaoke or something.
Okay.
Do you have a go-to karaoke song?
Yeah,
This is one of my favorite questions to ask.
Yes, I do. I do. It is usually Learn to Fly, Foo Fighters.
Oh, Foo Fighters.
There we go.
Yeah.
Love it.
As I said, my voice has dropped like a step and a half or so in the last 10 years. So it's a little hard at the end, but I make it work.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's not an easy song to sing.
Nope.
Yeah. It's fun though. It's like right when people ask me my ranges, I'm like, that song, that's my range.
Yeah. It's a good range. In all seriousness, yeah.
Maybe on a Sunday morning it'll be even better. The real bass notes.
So anything currently that either that you've tapped into that's older, or music that may be current that you're really into right now?
I'm getting back into my piano heroes, honestly, like Elton John, Billy Joel. I was never a big Liberace fan, so I can't go there, but definitely those two. And just listening to their music again, watching videos especially. Like I love when a pianist is playing and they zoom in on their hands on the piano, and everyone is so different. And Elton John's got pretty stubby hands. He's way up there on the keys because he has to be. And there are also classical pianists who would be really high up on the keys because that's how they were taught to play, because you get a faster action on the key. But seeing them and just revisiting that after so many years, I got to see Elton John when he was at Barclays in 2019 as part of the farewell tour that became a much longer farewell tour.
Right.
Thanks, COVID. And the just revisiting them. And I was also revisiting some earlier albums and artists. So you asked me what the first album I bought for myself was. The first album that was bought for me was the inaugural album for Wolfmother.
Wow.
Yeah. Not in my wheelhouse, clearly, but I really love the song Joker and the Thief.
Yes.
And
great tune.
Someone used it. I'm a big Mets fan, and someone used it as their walk-up music last season. And I was like, oh, I haven't heard that song in forever. I'm going to go back, revisit. What are they doing? And answer is not much, but it's still a good song.
Right.
And,
right.
It's fun.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic song. That's very cool. So do you play piano?
I do. Yeah. I've been playing since I was about 2.5.
Wow. That's great. That's great. Now, Drew, you started pretty early on piano and then switched to guitar. or added
Yep.
in guitar, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much switch. I started around 4 or 5, I think, but that was mom was a music major in college and forced all of us kids. There's a lot of us to start around that age. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm one of four, and we all, like the entire family for generations, everyone learned piano. And then
Mhm.
some people, like my brother, were rebellious and learned the cello, and it's about as rebellious as you got. And yeah,
Bad boy
so
cello player. Yeah.
seriously,
Mhm.
and honestly, it's the one instrument I really want to learn next is cello.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would play piano, and my dad played all the time, and he was a big fan of Beethoven, of Gershwin, and he was constantly playing when he got home. So usually when you sit a kid in front of the piano, they're banging away, and
Mhm.
that's just what happens. Apparently, because I don't remember this, apparently I sat down around 1.5, 2, and I was poking at the keys instead, very gently, and like matching up certain notes. And then suddenly my left hand came up, and I started doing with my pointer fingers 2 notes at a time, and I was figuring out octaves
Mm.
and notes that sounded right. And if it didn't sound right, if it was a dissonance or a diminished or something that didn't quite sound right, I slipped my finger over to the next key.
Hmm.
And so it was hard finding a teacher who would take me on that early. So usually it's about 4 or 5 is the minimum that they'll take you
Mhm.
on. And we finally found someone, and she was my teacher until I went off to college.
Wow.
Awesome. Now you mentioned earlier that you have perfect pitch. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you also mentioned sort of a synesthetic or synesthesia approach when it comes to whiskey. What is
Mhm.
that kind of interpolation or overlap for you? How does that work?
It is so much fun. And I mean that genuinely. I can usually come off as sarcastic, but I mean that genuinely. I love the synesthesia. I think I like him a lot more than the perfect pitch. If I had to choose one, I'd go the synesthesia route. I'll tell you why in a second. But the synesthesia is fun because it effuses your whole body,
Hmm.
and you really you know, especially when you get to a point where you know a song or you're just playing around and you can close your eyes while you play. The sensations and the sights that come up, they can be colors and abstracts, or they can be scenes and memories. And to me, it strengthens those bonds. Having the synesthesia and when I'm trying whiskey or playing music, it strengthens everything together because I'm reviving these memories I haven't thought of, and then I'll think of a whiskey. Or the reverse will happen. I'll try a whiskey and it'll remind me of a sense memory, and I'm like, oh, that was something I played at Queens College, or in this class, or with that teacher, whatever, and or
Hmm.
on this instrument. And it for me, again, it's a grounding experience too. It
Hmm.
just it forces me to focus on what I'm doing and let myself not only focus but also let go
Hmm.
and say, I'm just going to experience what this is. It's almost like taking drugs, I guess, because I haven't done that either. I'm so straight laced. It's really boring. Um, like, and like a high proof bourbon is the highest drug I've done. So, uh, but it the way that people describe like LSD and psychedelics and that kind of thing is just relaxing, even ketamine kind of relaxing
Mhm.
and letting it go. For me, whiskey has that effect, and certain types of music have that effect too.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is there
that's
a
great,
type?
man.
Is there a type of music or particular artist or song that you gravitate to when you're drinking whiskey?
Generally, no. I do I do tend to taste. If I'm That's the thing. If I'm tasting, like I'm trying to write a review on something the first time, I won't have any music. I won't. I generally sometimes I'll have
Hmm.
the TV on, but I won't be watching.
Mhm.
I'm really trying to focus everything I can on just the whiskey because I'm also easily distracted. Not because I don't have ADD or anything. It's more just I hear everything,
Mhm.
and I hear when things are off. So I just try to shut everything off. But if I'm drinking for enjoyment, then it's very much dependent on what I'm drinking. Drinking scotch, it tends to be more classical. But still, I'm just a big fan of symphonies. Tchaikovsky is my go-to. I love his orchestrations. Reading through the scores is a pleasure, which is not something you hear every day. And that's a pun, didn't you know it? And so Tchaikovsky, and then the Rachmaninoff piano concertos are another favorite of mine. It's my life goal. It's that goal that everyone has that they know they're not going to achieve, but you still have it anyway, of being able to play the Rock 3. Which if anyone listening has seen the movie Shine, that's the one that made another David literally lose his mind.
Yep.
And like I've tried playing just the third movement, the first 2 pages. That's as far as I got. I was able to learn it. I was like, no, not doing it. The second I can do better. The second I've gotten farther. But it's just the biggest thing is his hands. The guy had massive hands.
Huge. Yeah, like octave and then 2.
Yeah, hands. Like I've got, I mean, obviously you can't tell in the video, but like I've got pretty good sized hands. Like I've got pianist hands. But I can't reach that. Elton John would be like halfway through, and I'm trying to do this. My wrist is screaming, "Help me!" And like it doesn't work. So I've tried, and there's a version of each concerto that's written for, instead of being a piano in the entire orchestra, it's written as basically the piano part that's written for piano, and then the second piano that plays all the orchestral notes as a second piano. So I'm not really sure why I bought that, because obviously I can't play 2 pianos at once, but I did it because it's easier to read in terms of what the chord structure is supposed to be through the entire orchestra. And kind of to the synesthesia point, I like seeing things from the 30,000 foot view and then going into it, because then I can see the structure. I can see what note is meant to be the dissonance, what note is meant to be the counterpoint, and focus on those and then devolve from there. It's like breaking down a protein or an amino acid, because I also like biochem. And so it's, for me, it's that's where the rational side comes in, but it's also the creative side, because while I'm breaking down, let's say it's a protein structure, while I'm breaking down this carbon chain, it's in a lot of different colors and shapes and all these things. So it's very difficult to describe, and it makes me sound absolutely insane, but that's just how I see it and how I experience it.
Yeah. It's fascinating, David. Thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah. You bring a very intellectual approach to it, and I think that the people that read your reviews or listen to your podcast, that's got to be something that is appreciated. At least I appreciate it. When we referred to that article earlier, what I appreciated about it was, one, you were I thought very fair, very balanced in the way you presented it. But there were times where I'm thinking, okay, what about? And you answered okay, well, what about? In the way you did your article, and it was very well researched, and you had all your information together, and that's something that you don't often get in life, for one, but certainly not in a whiskey review or a article about a whiskey brand. So
you mean you don't like Vine Pair articles? I mean, they're fantastic. What are you talking about?
There are some things I just steer clear of. Okay, you learn after a while. But anyway, we're going to start wrapping things up. We've kept you for a while here, but really appreciate you being on with us. This was a lot of fun. I hope you had a good time as well.
I did. And if I could take 2 minutes on that,
Absolutely.
there is one question that I think you were going to ask, and I want to make sure it is addressed because it's kind of a sensitive one on that topic, on the topic of the article.
Yep.
Very simply, why Uncle Nearest? Like, why did I quote unquote go after them? And it's been asked of me by many people, so I'll just address it this way. The simple answer is because they sent me the products and I had them. And when I asked about them, that's the response I got. I ask whenever I have people on or people send me things to try, I almost always have a question, at least one. And I just want to know more about it.
Right.
And that's really, if I had to put on a why, it's because they gave me the product and then the answers were either insufficient or, let's say, not well received. So that's really why. It had nothing. I hope I made that clear in the article. If not, hope to make it clear now that it's not something personal against them. It's about, and I think the story is great. I like the people who are there. It's more just about living up to the standard and the story that you're telling.
Right.
If you want to be, and I'll happily throw this brand under the bus, if you want to be Good Times and have the Instagram videos of you moving things between garbage cans and pails and all of that, fine. That's who you are. You can be that jackass. I don't know how PG or not we can go. We can be that jackass. But that's not what you're presenting. I've been on site at Uncle Nearest. I've seen the stills, the room, everything is so professional and curated. I was like, this is all so intentional and thought out. The barn structure, the way that they took stables for walking horses and explained what a walking horse is to an idiot from New York City who has never seen a walking horse in his life other than the ones that pull carriages in Central Park. Like, that is all, every piece of it was intentional. And I wrote about that immediately after coming back. And this was in August of last year. And then you come out with this BS and it doesn't match.
Right.
And that's why I went after them. If you can call it that. That's why I called them out.
I didn't, when I read it, I didn't view it as you going after them at all. You're trying to determine, okay, truth from puffery or sloppy labeling. And they very easily could have nipped this whole thing in the bud and just said, yeah, that's not a great label. You're right, David. That's not a great label. And we need to fix that. And thanks for pointing it out. But
in a way, they kind of did. Because by the third label, things were a little clearer. And
it's still not a great label.
It's still not a great label. No, I completely agree. It's still not a great label, but at least by the end of it, you knew it was from British Columbia. And you knew it was aged and used to Uncle Nearest barrel. So it was something. And sure. The one other thing I know I'm dragging us on is that I did tease where I'm going next with that. And this goes back to the TTB question you asked too. Like, what if I was in charge of the TTB?
Right.
Was, again, this whole thing came out of, I tasted something that said it was a rye and didn't taste like a rye. If you look at Canadian whiskey, you can have something that's called 100% rye that has no rye in there. Because their definition of rye is just a cereal grain. So you can have 100% rye whiskey that's made from 100% corn. And because it's made in Canada, it follows Canadian law, not US law, even if it's imported here. So I thought to myself, this is wild speculation, but what if you had something that was called 100% rye on a US market, but actually had no rye in it, or had a lesser percentage of rye in it? So I'm hitting up my contacts in the gas chromatography mass spectrometry area, and we're going to have a little fun and find out. The worst that happens is they prove it's 100% rye.
No, that's great. No, I love that. I love that.
Can't wait to read that one.
Yeah.
That one, if anything, that one might get me sued, but we'll see.
Nah. Well, David, tell everybody where they can find you on social media and they can catch up with the articles that you've written, with the podcast and your reviews. And I'll tell you right now that a lot of times if I'm in a store and I'm walking the aisles and I see something that I think looks interesting, I'll look through your reviews and see if it's there and get your take on it. And it's you and maybe 2 or 3 others that I'll go to and see what's there, because I know it's going to be at a level of thoughtfulness that I can trust. But tell everybody where they can find you.
All right, so you're the one now. So they can find me at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring. That's whiskey with an E on Instagram, page on Facebook. You can also apply to join the Whiskey Ringers Facebook group. It's free to join. It's just to have more information, and you get first access to events and tastings and such. I'm gonna put a little more work into that this year. I'm at Whiskey Ring on Twitter. There is an Instagram account for Whiskey Ring Podcast, but honestly, I'm gonna shove all that into Whiskey with My Wedding Ring and just hold it so no one else grabs it. And other than that, yes, I write. I try to put out 3 to 4 reviews a week. Now they're usually around whoever my guest is for the podcast that week. Podcast episodes come out almost always on every Wednesday. Of course, as we're recording, the last one came out on a Tuesday, so can't say that anymore, but they should come out on Wednesdays. And yeah, we've got some really great guests coming up that I'm excited to talk about, some brands that people have never heard of, which I think is the best thing. I love listening to 20 podcasts and reading 20 interviews to find new questions, but I also love sometimes, being able to bring Pocano from New Zealand.
Yeah.
They're going to be a guest later this month,
Awesome.
Bring them in. So that'll be fun.
That's terrific.
Fantastic.
Drew, how about yourself?
Yep. If you are interested in hearing my thoughts on being a total hater on Morgan Wallen and just generally the state of things in the world, you can find me on Twitter at DrewCrawley63. Everything else is drewcrawleymusic.com. That's the link to Instagram, Facebook, Bands in Town, YouTube, Spotify, everywhere, and anything related to my music. That'll be now the central location for that. And I would be honored if you'd stream the music, and even more honored if you'd find your way to a show. We've got a lot of Louisville dates coming up, and some dates coming up next, I guess in the fall, for Ohio and West Virginia as well. So
awesome.
Coming up. Yeah.
Awesome.
Can I just ask Drew if he's June 3rd? Is that why the 63?
No, it is not. It is not. So the 63 is my favorite guitar that I own, which is the 1963 Fender Jaguar.
Okay, I was gonna say, Kevin, I might think maybe 6. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I was like, you definitely don't look older for 63. So okay, continue.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and for the record, I was not born in 63 either. So let's just get that cleared up right away.
Sorry.
Wow.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll try to muddle through the rest of this. Hey, for the show, you can watch the show on YouTube. Go over there, hit subscribe, so you can find great shows like this where the guests insult me. You can listen to the show on your favorite podcast platform, as long as it's Apple, Spotify, or Google. We have a Facebook page where we post all of our shows. We have a Facebook group where we encourage you to go on there, post what you're listening to, post what you're drinking. It may inspire somebody to try something different, either in what they want to drink next time or what they may want to listen to next time as well. So next week, our show, let me find that graphic real quick. This will be a fun one.
Yeah, next week we're talking about the Dark Side of the Moon 50th anniversary. So Pink Floyd talk. We'll be joined by our good friends Mike and Alan, who you've seen on here before. Sure to be a great time.
Yeah, that will be a lot of fun. So, David, thank you very much for being here. It was a blast, and we will have to do it again when you're in Kentucky. Be sure to look us up. We'll take good care of you while you're here. Just ask around. We take good care of people when they're here. But on behalf of David and Drew and myself, until next time, thank you for watching, and cheers, love, and free bird.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.